Okay, I think we're going to get started. So thanks everyone for joining us. So today we're going to go through some of the building blocks of DARS. My name is Sean Higgins. I'm a systems analyst with DARS and eAdvisor Critical Tracking. I'm joined today by my colleague Derek Imamura, who's also a systems analyst with DARS and eAdvisor Critical Tracking. So here's the agenda for today. So we'll start with a brief summary of DARS, and then we're joined today by some guest speakers who are going to talk about their involvement with DARS and how their areas touch upon DARS. And then we'll have a demo and a workshop, and then we'll wrap up with any questions that you may have. So here are presenters for today. So we're joined by Andrew Altman, who's a data analyst with EdPlus, Jacqueline Brower, Assistant Director, Applicant Services with Admission Services, Lori Harkin, Management Research Analyst Principal with the Provost Enrollment Analysis, and Tanea Dempsey, who's the Director at Academic Transfer Credit Solutions. So what is DARS? So anyone that's been an ASU student may be familiar with DARS. I know when I was a student, I worked very closely with my advisor using the tool. So what it is it's a tool that shows real-time progress towards graduation. You can think of it as sort of like a degree checklist. So it's marking classes that you need to take, classes that you have taken, you've completed. All students who are pursuing an undergraduate degree or an undergraduate certificate should have a DARS audit. It's dynamic, it's not static. So as you progress in your degree, it's changing and updating with you. We also have what if audits. So if students want to change their major or their program, they can run what if audits, and it's essentially showing their progress towards another degree, and they can make the decision whether or not they think it would be feasible to switch majors. So UAchieve, so this is the product that automates the processing of degree audit data, and it aids students, advisors, and administration all the way from admissions to graduation. And it encompasses the DARS client, the server, and the database. So it's owned by College Source, and it's been modified and highly customized for ASU to meet ASU's needs. So an example that you would see where it is super customized would be in ASU self-service, which we'll talk more about in the coming slides.
All right, so moving on, we'll be discussing eAdvisor tracking, which is a product that came about with UAchieve. So eAdvisor is a project that was created at ASU to address critical needs to improve academic retention and graduation rates. This system is able to advise and guide students through major selection and an associated degree program's requirements. As a disclaimer, Sean and I do not work for the Provost's office directly, but we do support and maintain the system to ensure its operability and success. So on the student side, students are able to access eAdvisor content using the My Major Map tool, which is a personalized view of a selected major. The intent here is to assist students with a directed roadmap, which can ensure all necessary courses for a recommended 8-term track are being satisfied. The My Major Map tool can be accessed frequently on a term-by-term basis to determine if strict adherence to a student's track term is being followed. So on the other side, on the advising side, advisors can access eAdvisor content using an advisor tracking tool to monitor and internally review the status of any student's track term. So if a student is found to be off track, advisors are able to recognize why, and they can work directly with the students on an individual basis to decide a best course of action towards graduation. All right, so for those of you who are more akin to visuals, here's a chart which is intended to show specific areas where eAdvisor has influence, denoted by the graduation caps icons. And a comparison for this could be made to how widely used UAchieve is and is built upon as eAdvisor has grown to be part of an ecosystem of tools that are relied upon extensively at ASU. So I won't go into detail of all the tools. We spend quite a lot of time here on that. So just to sum this up, eAdvisor is a significant example of a product that was derived from the audit processing engine of UAchieve, and it extends its capabilities to utilize audit data for student empowerment and success. So, which includes degree expectation transparency for students, and emphasizes the sequence of courses in a smaller, more bite-sized approach rather than overwhelmingly hierarchy of requirements. So the goal has always been to assist students and guide them toward a program based more around personal interests and career aspirations. We feel we're just getting started, really, as this project has been a massive learning experience to establish essential groundwork needed to further design and evolve toward a more dynamic, data-centered, interactive approach to degree planning, which we hope to unveil and discuss in more detail maybe during next year's data conference. So I will hand the next part of our presentation over to Andrew Altman, who's actually joining us through Zoom to discuss the USNCC DARS use case.
Thank you, Sean. And hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. My name is Andrew Altman, and I'm a data analyst with the EdPlus data team. I did want to call out here that a lot of the work that has been done was actually initiated by my colleague Z. He's out on sick leave for surgery, so he is not here to present, but we've been working closely together and looking forward to telling you a little bit about USNCC and how we're using the DARS tables. So we can go to the next slide. Okay. USNCC is short for United States Naval Community College, and ASU formed a partnership to offer Associates of Arts degrees through ASUO. This partnership actually launched about a year ago for a military studies program. And since then, we've had over 270 students enrolled, and we recently launched a new AA degree, Org Leadership, which will be available this spring. One thing to note is that there have been a number of teams within ASU that have been working with USNCC. From a technical perspective, we needed to be able to provide updates on student progress towards these degrees and ensure that USNCC is able to track this information on their end. So essentially, we're ingesting information on students who are applying to these programs, and then returning that information back to USNCC so they have an idea of what we're capturing and where these students are. So if you want to go to the next slide. These three bullets kind of outline the uses for the DARS tables that well, I'll present a little bit later. But the first is that USNCC is part of a partnership that is covering the cost of tuition for courses taken. It's limited to only a single course in addition to a ASU 101. So we want to ensure that the courses these students are taking will go towards their degree. The second thing that we have to report back to USNC on is transfer courses. The DARS table was probably the best source for understanding all of the courses that those students transfer and which courses will have earned credits and which of those credits will count towards their degree. And then lastly, for our own internal use, we've created a degree progress report which we're calling the DARS Easy View. And it just gives a high level overview of where those students are sitting in terms of percent complete, percent in progress, and what's not met. And we can move on to the next slide. So the first table, which Derek may or may not talk about later, I think this was implemented before I kind of became heavily involved in the USNCC program. And I believe Derek was the one who was responsible for creating this table, but I may be speaking incorrectly. Anyways, this has been a very helpful table for us and a very useful table for ensuring that we are tracking these military studies, these Associates of Arts degrees appropriately. On the right, you'll see a query that we use to try and capture that information at a student level. And there's definitely some manipulation that needs to be done. There's to ensure consistent information in each of those rows or columns. And that way we can then be able to join to future data sources later on and make sure that what we're seeing these students taking will match what so what we see the students are taking will match what's in their DARS report. And so that's our first use case, is ensuring that we are covering the courses, or these students are taking courses that are covered. And that's what this table really helps us to do. You can go on to the next slide. Transfer courses was another difficult one for us. We kind of played around with several different sources to try and understand what would be the best way to capture all of the transfer courses and where they're coming from and whether or not they received credit for them. Ultimately, we used these three tables and joined them together to get all of the transfer credit that would apply towards the degree. And I think you can go on to the next slide. And then lastly, progress reporting. So I think this prototype view is one of the newer tables that was created, and that one was very helpful. Not much to do in terms of data cleaning. The table itself is pretty easy to use. The only thing we need to account for is ensuring that we get the most recent run date for the appropriate program. Now that there are two programs, it gets a little more complicated, but for the most part, it's pretty easy to take a look at hours that are needed for their degree, what they've completed, and calculate a percent complete. The other two tables, I should also note this prototype table is coming from the user databases, Postgres, and then everything else has been coming from the Redshift schemas, I believe. So these next two tables then we use in conjunction to pull in progress hours. So this tells us what students are currently taking that does apply towards their degree. And pulling all this together allows us to keep track of where that student is in terms of degree completion. And I think that's about it for what I have to provide.
Great, thank you, Andrew. We didn't prepare everyone. We were looking at SQL queries on the screen here. Yeah, that was a great insight. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So next up, we'll have Lori Harkin discuss DARS reporting data.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to start by asking, with a show of hands, how many of you have ever wanted to estimate the hours remaining to a student's degree? Okay. What about requirements a student still needs to complete? Okay. And finally, courses students have taken in a particular academic plan that are used to satisfy a particular requirement. Okay, well, these are the sorts of questions that we sought to answer in the DARS to Data Warehouse project. So we will be adding more. Right. Okay. Already having a little issue here. Of course.
Oh, that's
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Okay. Okay, so here's my agenda. I have a lot of slides. I will do the best I can to get through them, but if not, the presentation will be posted with lots of notes. So, okay, I'm going to talk about just briefly the DARS to Data Warehouse project, who's included and how, important things to know about the data, self-service audits. Actually, I might move past that because I think I saw that somebody else might be talking about it. Tables and views, estimating progress to degree, and access. Okay, so the DARS to Data Warehouse project that started, I want to say, if I recall correctly, it was about late 2017. And the goal of the project was to create tables and views that would enable users to answer DARS related questions like those I just asked all of you. It's been several years, so there's been a number of different milestones, activities. I'll mention a couple of those, probably one of the most important being the baseline graduation audit run, which was done in August of 2019. This was just after the start of the fall 19 term. We developed 4 DARS data warehouse tables at that point in one view. The view was called the Deltas view. I'll talk more about the tables as I move forward. That was phase 1 of the project. Phase 2, we developed some user tables, followed by an IDP view, and that would be interactive degree planner. That was kind of a second project. We then implemented our first enrollment campaign. It was actually a not enrolled campaign using our progress data, and that was for fall 20. In the 2 years since that time, we've implemented a number of additional not enrolled campaigns, some graduation campaigns, and some assorted, I want to say University College had some campaigns I didn't personally handle, but I know that they were out there. We've also spent a lot of time tackling all of the data issues that have surfaced during those campaigns and at other times. And now we're at the point where we're migrating our tables to Redshift. Actually, the user tables are being converted to Redshift, and we hope to have those anytime, but definitely by the end of the year. Okay, so who's included? So term active undergraduate degree seeking students. In addition, students who graduated and are no longer enrolled due to withdrawals or drops, with the exception of any students who would have had or enrolled or dropped or graduated prior to that initial baseline run in 2019. We're also including certificate seeking students. This just happened within the last couple of weeks, so we will not be including those in the upcoming Redshift tables until we have a chance to do some validation. So triggers and timing. Okay, so audits are run daily for students who had a change in their coursework and for those in larger batch runs periodically within a term. So those batch runs would be end of term processing, things like that. In terms of change, it would be any change that occurred, well, say today, that change could be a drop course, an added course, a major change, a grade that was posted, or maybe a changed. So if that happens today, then a batch run will run tomorrow, and then the day after that, we'll see that student's audit in the warehouse. So like I just said, 2-day turnaround. Just a note, the last audit run date can differ significantly among students. So it is always a good idea just to keep track of, or at least keep that run date in mind. It could be very old. And so if it is old, it may be something you might want to look into further. There could be a situation where something happened and there should be a more recent audit and it just didn't run. Okay, this is a program flow of this whole data warehouse process. The most important takeaway is what I just mentioned, that it's pretty much a 2-day turnaround. So if you're not seeing audits within even a week, it would be something to look into, because there's probably something that went wrong along the way. Okay, important things to know. This is our analytics space. It's called the Progress to Degree Analytics Space, and I have the URL there. Contains a lot of different information, a data dictionary, information on our tables, the logic behind those tables, and then there's some information I'm going to actually cover. Plus, there's a lot of other information in pages that aren't mentioned here. Okay, so the slides that I'm going to cover, like maybe the next 5 or 6 slides, are really going to, I'm really providing those to give you some context about our tables. So the first being this here, catalog year versus requirement term. Catalog year is the year of the major map, the roadmap, the DPROG, which would be the degree program code, basically the year of the audit. It's always a fall term, and it will have the 5-digit year term code. Requirement term, on the other hand, is the student's requirement term, or the term of their catalog year. It is PeopleSoft, and it will have the year term code, 4-code digit. Okay, categories, requirements, and sub-requirements. And I'm mentioning this because of how the tables that we've created are kind of laid out. Categories are a grouping of like requirements. That would be majors, general studies, professional, upper division 45. Filled categories, which is what our progress view what's included in our progress view, are derived off of the category, and they were created to backfill null categories present in our older audits, and to combine or filter out certain categories as a way of streamlining reporting. So with the introduction of the golden audit, there are significantly less categories that haven't been populated. So that problem is going away, but we still want to have the filled category to assist us with the streamlining of the reporting. Requirements are items like courses, hours that must be completed to earn a degree. Those would be things like your first year composition requirement, your awareness, a math requirement. Upper division 45 is also there, which is kind of confusing because it can be a requirement and it can be a category. So keep that in mind. Sub-requirements are parts of the requirement. Each sub-requirement is independent and must be completed in order to complete the requirement. Okay. Known data errors. So we have found data errors in our data. These are actually data errors are the rules or expectations that have not been met. So an example of this would be job ID. Job ID, there should be one job ID for every student, DPROG, and run date. But we're finding some instances where there are more than one job ID. So that's something that we've had to make well, we've accounted for in another slide I'll talk about. But if you see one error in an audit, there's a very good chance you're going to see multiple errors. So we recommend not even using the audit. And we have handled errors in this tracking table that I make mention to. It includes error types. We have some other information, and we have some other tables that actually describe the errors. Okay, ORDs. Anybody who's been in a presentation that I've given or a meeting has heard me talk about the pesky ORD requirements. These are in all academic plans, mostly because the first year composition requirement is an ORD requirement. They are requirements and sub-requirements that are grouped together into a set of options where a student can choose one or the other option. So a student can take a focus area A or a focus area B, but they don't have to create both. And where the problem lies is all of the options are listed in the data. So this causes the hours to become duplicated and inflated. And so we need logic to handle those ORD requirements to unduplicate those hours. Okay, audit ID. And I mentioned the job ID issue. So audit ID was created as a way of correcting that issue. And it's a key of sorts which replaces job ID. And it's basically a concatenation of the EMPL ID, the DPROG, the run date, and the job ID. In progress data. And I'm mentioning this because it can be very ambiguous. And the reason I say that is the data is audit-based and not term-based. And that basically means that when you have in progress hours, they could be from multiple terms. So you could be enrolled in fall 22 and you could be registered for spring 23, and they're both going to show up as in progress. So it kind of misleads one in terms of what the hours are. So you might think you have 6 hours remaining when instead you might have 15 if you have those future in progress hours. So something to keep in your head. Okay, I'm going to pass over this. I want to say I saw this somewhere else in the presentation. So I'm going to pass over. What I'll say about this, and the only reason that I included it was they are an excellent source of validation of our self-service, or the self-service audits are an excellent source of the data that we have in the warehouse. I use them all the time. So this is the dashboard. And this is just the order of the requirements in an audit. I also have information at the end of my presentation as to how to get access, which somebody else might do. Tables and views. So the existing tables right now in the data warehouse are, and somebody might have pointed to some in one of the earlier presentation, but we have the what I call the source tables, because these are the tables that we're using, we're combining to create our customized tables. So we have I'm not going to go into the actual names, but we have the DPROG, the requirements, the sub-requirements, and the course. We also had that deltas view that we're not using that anymore because of the IDP view, but we also have the error tables, which again, I mentioned identify errors by the type of error, plus their sequencing of the run dates that allows us to capture whether it's the first audit or the last audit, and that would be error-free audits. The IDP view, and that would be the interactive degree planner view, is a very comprehensive view. It has so much great information. The problem is it is very slow. It even includes the critical tracking sequencing, which is, well, I want to say it's new, but it really isn't. It's probably at least a year old. It does not include the ORD logic, and the hours are not aggregated, so it is tricky to use for certain use cases, specifically progress. The future tables in Redshift, and these are the ones I'm going to talk about in more detail if I have time, and you'll let me know. We have these, again, these will be coming in the future. We have the progress object, the requirements object, the courses object, and the category object. I'm not going to say the specific names of the tables because I've noticed some differences. And so I just want to be sure of what they actually are. And we'll make a note on, we'll post it somewhere when the tables are actually in Redshift, so we have their full names. So the development user tables, these are basically what those are, but they're going to be in Redshift. And those tables are currently, these are the ones we've been using. They're in the student success analytics collaboration. All of a sudden I forgot. I knew it last night, but in that schema, data in these tables is aggregated and contains a student's latest error-free audit per DPROG as determined by run date. So if a student has multiple DPROGs, they will all be there based on that most recent error-free audit. Logic is included for ORD requirements to handle the hours duplication when courses fulfill multiple requirements, so the double dipping. Certificates are captured, but are not yet included, and we'll be doing some validation on those. Okay, so the audit table, and I'm gonna put this down. You know, it's a small room. I could probably just go without that. No, do you need it? Oh, okay, hold on. I just want to get to my page because I may need to refer to my notes. Bear with me here. That's fine. Okay, so the audit table, I could probably do this by memory, but I was nervous. Contains a single row per audit with flags for known data errors. It's run daily. The sequence numbers, and not to be confused with that sequencing I mentioned earlier in the IDP, the sequence numbers are included based on run date. There's 2 associated columns in the table, or in this table. One is for first audit and one is for latest audit. And that would be latest error-free audit. The maximum dated audit with no errors per student and DPROG, those are used to populate all of our tables. And that would be progress requirements courses. This table contains the academic plan, so it can kind of serve as a crosswalk between our DARS tables and the PeopleSoft tables, because most of the tables just contain DPROG. One note, prior to 10.13, we were using the audit user table, but when it was put into Redshift, we lost academic plans. So we no longer will have any academic plans for audits prior to 10.13.21. Of course, in most instances, we usually a student, if they're active, they're going to have an audit in the last year. So in most cases, you won't have that issue. I do have examples that show that issue, but just poor choice of an example. Okay, here are a couple of examples. This is an audit that has no errors. And this is where I was going to use my notes, but I'm going to go from memory if I can. So I have one student here, and this student has multiple audits. There's no errors. And I've highlighted in yellow for that one particular, which I think there's 18 audits. I highlighted in yellow in the first column. That is the last audit, and that's the audit that will be in our table. The one in the last column, that is that's the first audit that this student had. That's error-free. At some point, we're hoping, and I think it's very possible, that we will have additional tables that will look at these different audits. So hopefully maybe like a snapshot where we'll have students first audit, because there are use cases for that. Let's see, what else could I point out here? The last row with the blue highlighting, that simply means that this student has, it's probably a new plan, and they have one audit, so it's the first and the last. And the highlight I was trying to point to, the pink, just pointing to the fact that there isn't an academic plan, because that audit was prior to 10/13/21. Let's see if there's anything else. I think that's it. Okay, so this is an audit with data errors. And you can see there's actually 2 students. The last 2 rows are the second student, but all of those pink highlights are errors. And you'll notice that the table, we don't provide a sequencing number when there's an audit, meaning none of those audits will ever appear in one of our tables. So for this specific student, the audit, the first audit is about the third up, and the last audit is about halfway down the last column. I don't remember. I have additional notes, but I think that was my point, that we're not including audits with errors. The last student, again, they had 1 audit, or excuse me, 2 audits. 1 audit had errors and it's not included. So we're including the one, I think it says 1/19/21 audit. That's the audit that'll be in our tables. Okay, DARS progress table. This is the table that we've been using the most. This is the one that feeds our not enrolled campaigns. It has the completion hours. This provides the aggregation of all hours requirement got, in progress, needs, and earned, along with an estimation to completion value by adjusted field category. It includes logic to handle those ORD requirements. And something to always keep in mind is that progress to degree is always an estimate, and it always has to be that way because of the double dipping. And even though we do have logic to handle it, there could be something that slips through. I will say that I've been doing a lot of validation over the last couple of years since this was created, and we're darn close in terms of the numbers that we're coming up with. The algorithm that we created to calculate progress combines and compares selected adjusted field categories. And I'll talk about those later. So, okay, the progress table, this is just an example. There are more columns with DPROG and all the different IDs, but this is just the hours. And a couple of things to point out: university total hours, they will continue counting as long as something is in progress. So that's why you will see audits sometimes where a student has 256 hours. They just keep going. Let's see, I think it's the unused hours do the same. And those, when I say unused, those would be the hours at the very bottom of an audit that don't count towards any requirement, but they do count towards the hours. Let's see. So in this example, the estimated hours is 44, and it was pretty simple in that it was simply the upper division hours. Okay, the requirements table, again, provides an aggregation of the hours, but by requirement. So it differs from the progress table in that the progress is by field category. This is by requirement. So the added level of granularity allows us to look at requirements such as those general study different areas or designations, whereas the progress view, you're going to look at general studies as a whole or major as a whole. This is going to break it down by the individual requirement. It does include logic for ORDs, requirements, and sub-requirements. This is an example. And basically what I'm trying to show here is that you have your general studies adjusted field category, and then you have the specific requirements that are being fulfilled. There is also a requirement satisfied field that lets you know, you could look at the hours too, but that lets you know whether or not the requirement has been completed, or if it's in progress, or if it hasn't been completed. So in this example, 4 of the general studies are completed, 4 aren't. That's about it. The courses table, that provides a list of all courses that apply to a student's audit, and it compares them to the adjusted categories and the requirements and how they apply to those. So it includes courses that are completed, in progress, transferred, or registered. And I mentioned registered because of what I mentioned earlier, in that you could have the in progress, but you can also have registered future term. It does not include any future coursework that's not registered, I would say, is not included here. So it contains flags for repeated courses and repeated courses in progress. So the example here, it shows, and this is such a bad example. I wish I would have used a different example because it only gives us a couple of categories that we're looking at. But you can see here that all of these courses are fulfilling the university total hours and the GPA, with the exception to Physics 121 and 22. They're also fulfilling general studies, but it gives you an idea of how the table works. So you'll see courses listed multiple times with all of the categories that they're fulfilling. The other thing that I'm pointing out is Math 275. You could see that this is the 3rd attempt. It's been repeated, students getting Ds, and now they're taking it again. Estimating progress. Boy, I'm getting really close to the end. So estimating progress. This is probably the most sought after measure from everything that we've done. So the progress to degree estimation looks at needs hours for various categories, takes the potential for overlap, double dipping, into account, and then uses those values to estimate the hours needed for completion. So the content of the categories vary significantly. So you can have some categories with no potential for overlap, and then you can have others that overlap significantly. So these would be, those that overlap significantly would be your total, the 120, the total hours, your upper division 45, general studies. Let's see what else. I know there's another, resident credit. Those that don't have the potential would be your major, well, actually, it would, the ones that are in our algorithm, it's going to be major, college, professional, pre-professional, pre-recs, and I'm missing one, college. Did I say college? Well, related area. So none of those categories should ever overlap. So this is how we're doing our algorithm. We are 3 steps. We're selecting the categories and we're taking the max needs hours. We're then, the second step is we're going to sum the hours of the categories for those categories that are not overlapping. So those 6 categories I mentioned. We're then going to find the maximum number of hours among the step 2, which is those hours that we just summed. We're going to compare it to university total hours, upper division, and resident credit. And then that maximum hour among those 4 groups is what we're going to use for calculating our hours remaining, total hours remaining. This is an example. So again, I don't have all of the categories, but for these students, these are what's showing. So you'll see what I did in step 1 is I just highlighted all of the categories I'm using. We don't bother with first year comp or general studies. Those we just assume will be completed and they don't add to our algorithm. You'll see here that I've selected the needs hours. I then, in the very end, in step 2, I went ahead and I summed those hours that don't overlap, and I came up with 3834. And then in step 3, I took 3834 and I compared it to the resident credit, the let's see, I can't see, the resident credit, the upper division, and the total hours, and 42, which is upper division, ended up being our maximum number of hours. And so that's what we determined as the hours remaining. One more. Same situation. I highlighted the categories that I'm using. I summed the hours that don't overlap and came up with 84.75. And then I compared it with the other 3 categories. And in this case, the university total hours had 90.75 needs hours. And so that's what we determined to be the needs hours remaining. Access, I'm done. So this is how you access our data. You can go to ServiceNow and you can go to the reporting data access request and use the data area degree audits. And this is how you get to our self-service. It'll be in the report because somebody else might be covering it. But it is here with some links, and there's a link on how to read a self-service audit. And that's all I got. So I don't know if you wanted to do questions now or later.
Oh, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the one where there was 42 credits.
Yes.
And that was calculated off the division. That's mostly just the best guesstimate that you can get out of this, because it wasn't taken into account in that example. If they have a very specific lower division,
Yes.
then it adds on.
Yes. And that's one of the issues that we've come up with the algorithm. So what you might have is we're looking at in our non-overlapping, say major is included, and major has an upper division and a lower division component. So they're not technically fulfilling, or at least the double dipping isn't what we might think. So that is one of the exceptions that needs some additional review, but we haven't, as of yet, we haven't had the time, but it is definitely out there on the table. No? Okay.
Right. So moving on, we'll have Jacqueline Brower talk about admission services and DARS.
All right. And I'm going to be nice and quick and easy. So admission services, we're kind of the starting point when it comes to the actual student data. And we pretty much use DARS as our giant calculator because it is giving us the data we need in order to make our admission decisions. So all transcripts come through admissions. So we handle every transcript, whether it's a continuing student or a new applicant into the university. We have 80 part-time student workers, 10 full-time staff, temporary staff, and then 7 more full-time staff who do nothing but download, match, and data enter transcripts all day, every day, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. So they are the main ones that are getting the data in. So when you have an error where something doesn't match up, most of the time it is because it is a pure data entry error. You know, we've got a lot of human hands doing a lot of the data entry. So once we data enter in a separate system that downloads into PeopleSoft. PeopleSoft then sets a flag that then pushes all that data down to DARS. And then once it's in DARS, we have an evaluation staff, another 10 people or so, that go and look at every single one of those courses and decides, is it a duplicate? Is it a non-transferable course? Fortunately, most of the stuff we're going to talk about afterwards is all the rules that have been created. A lot of those stuff is done already for us. So it's really nice that we have a lot less work than we used to. When I started 24 years ago as a student worker, we literally had just implemented DARS. And so the amount of information that is now in DARS and what we use it for, light years from where we were. So it is truly amazing how much progress we've made with that. So our staff then go through, put all those codes on. We also code competencies for ABOR policy. And then we push that data back. And so when we push the data back, the system actually does a calculation for us, figures out how many credits were transferable and what the GPA was on those courses. We have 2 different GPAs that get calculated, one that includes ASU work, domestic work, and international work together. And that is what admissions makes their admission decision on. There's also a separate GPA that's calculated and hours that's for English proficiency. So those are just made up of the transfer hours from a domestic school. So those are the 2 things that come out. We do a double check, make sure everything's calculated correctly, but honestly, math is not our thing. So pretty much the system pretty much does a very good job at that. And once we get that data back, that's what we use to make the admissions decisions. And that is it. That is how admissions uses DARS. We love DARS. We use it all day, every day. So, and it is really a great system. So that's it. I'm done.
All right, now we'll have Tanea Dempsey and talk about transfer information.
Well, I'm happy that Jackie was before me because it moves very nicely into that. So all the work that my team does on the transfer side to do evaluations is built off of the work that Jackie's team does. I like to show kind of like an overview because I think for those of us who don't see anything between the admitted piece to the actual courses being applied to student stars, you're not always sure like whose hands is it in, like why is it there? So it starts out with admissions. So they look at that transfer student. They're going to look at their coursework, start, as Jackie said, adding it to DARS and PeopleSoft. They'll have their application reviewed. As they're doing that, the cool thing about the way that our systems work with DARS is that it's going to start to look to see what courses were previously evaluated, and those will automatically get added onto the student's record. Shameless plug here, we have over 1 million course equivalency. So that means a lot of students are probably getting course equivalencies applied to their DARS and kind of moving through this process. Anything that is not articulated, that will import into our homegrown system, which is the transfer guide. So it's something that was built over, like as an overlay to UAchieve and DARS. Every 2 hours throughout the day, it's going to be pushed with new information. So as we have new courses, that'll be pushed to my team starts to evaluate. The biggest thing to be aware of is that as these things are all happening, we're trying to do them in real time. So we actually won't look at these students until they're matriculated and they've been term activated. You'll notice at the bottom, I put some priority program statuses we look at. So that's active, admitted, or waitlisted, which is our earned admission students. So that's when we're actually going to take a look at everything and start to evaluate if we need to. So as we are evaluating courses, new equivalencies get added to the transfer guide. They're going to auto update on DARS every 10 minutes. Throughout the day, DARS is rerunning and saying, hey, do I have a new rule? If I do, they're going to apply it. It's going to auto lock. And then once everything has been evaluated on DARS, then there is actually a notice that if anybody's in the colleges may be familiar with, which is a red X. That red X will stay on until everything's evaluated and locked and pushed back to PeopleSoft. So now it's ready to be reviewed and used as an advising tool. So that's just a high level. Okay. So I decided to take a couple of use case scenarios of transfer students and their stages in DARS. So these are just a high level list of them, and I'll go into them in detail. So one thing to be aware of is I know a lot of people who look at DARS may not get access to this page, and this is the transfer eval page. So this is the page my team will look at if we need to do any manual intervention on DARS. But in this example, this is a student that's a new transfer student, but is in the applied status, meaning it's not in the place where we're actually starting to evaluate their coursework. And they also won't have a default program status. And so the system will run to try to get these things to push through to our transfer guide system, but you're going to notice a lot of it's going to stay unlocked. It's not going to show equivalencies if we don't have them. The other thing people have a lot of questions about is why is there a red book and a blue book? So the red book is the source. So that's the transfer course. And then the target is the ASU equivalency and or no equivalency if we're not at that place yet. So you'll see JoJo is still in that beginning stages. You can pull some what if audits on these. So you can kind of pull like a quick default if you wanted to see just overview what is already being applied to the student's record, things of that nature. It will not be encompassing of everything, but a lot of times people want to see this if the student is a little anxious and waiting to see where they're at in that process, that this can be pulled from DARS even without a program, but it'll just be like an alphabetical list of their coursework. This one is a new transfer student, but decided not to transfer. So in that time frame in which the student has to provide all their information to admissions to make that admission decision, we are still collecting that data, which is kind of nice for my team because we can still evaluate it even if the student chooses not to come, and that'll help future students. But this will just be a little example of what this looks like. So those courses will start to come into my team's workflow through the transfer guide, which you'll see at the bottom. You can look up the student in PeopleSoft to kind of see where they're at in that process. And then you can run just a simple DARS audit to see where they were at. Sometimes this is really important when it comes to students, maybe they applied, didn't make the decision, then came back. Sometimes this is really good information for advisors to pull, or if they go and they decide instead of going on ground, they're going to go online. A lot of this information is there and available for them. So ASU, I don't remember how long ago, but a while ago, decided to start using the waitlisted program status. So ASU doesn't waitlist people, but this was used for our students who need to be put in earned admission status. So our team does prioritize those because the goal of those students is to get them to transfer. But this is just an example of what their DARS will look like and then what their My ASU. So one thing we usually get is students will say, well, I know I transferred in coursework. I want to see what it is. The way we know the difference between them, if we don't look in like the transfer guide or try to look in the PeopleSoft, is we can see on their My ASU, it clearly says they're an earned admission student. So they're kind of like placeholded. And then as we're evaluating though, those things will get updated on their record and it'll be ready to go once they're officially admitted into the university. So this is just an example of what they look like. Again, you can run an audit and get an alphabetical listing of their coursework. Again, students have a lot of concerns when making a decision to come here. So if they were waitlisted, now they're going to think there's a lot of other big red flags. And so this is something that's very helpful to advisors or to any support staff that are trying to help that student through that process. So this is now a existing transfer student that has unarticulated coursework. So this is probably the more common scenario we run into. So as those students submit their transcripts, those get applied, and then they start to show up on here, and those are being pushed into my team. This is a pretty easy example. My team sees the coursework, and as things are being evaluated, then the system's rerunning and it's starting to update. So you'll see some of these courses already showing equivalencies, and then you'll see that top example where it hasn't been evaluated. And you'll notice the big thing to be aware of is that the status is original. So that matters because that's what's actually communicating back to PeopleSoft to provide a full picture of their transfer coursework. And I talked about earlier that red X. So I hope I'm not triggering any of the college people here, but there is a red X that populates basically saying, hey, we're in the middle of evaluating. We do actually work with the colleges that if they need an immediate evaluation, instead of like our normal processing time, they can contact us. They usually say, hey, can you remove the red X? And we go in and we process that whole student's record. But that is what we'll show. And this is what we see on the back end when those requests come through. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Hi. Yeah, so as an overview, on average, it's 2 weeks. So when it actually is in my team's court, we're averaging about 3 business days to evaluate the coursework for that student. But that's an average. But we know also students come through the advising pipeline a little sooner than that. And that's why we do offer that option to reach out to us directly. Other question? Cool. And then this one is a transfer student with articulated coursework. So ideally, if this student came through the workflow, my team shouldn't see them. So what should happen is things should start to apply. Their record is going to get locked automatically, and then that's going to push back, and you'll know it pushed back because it says soft now in that status. So again, this student probably never even came through my workflow, and they're all ready to go. This is what they'll look like. So they now no longer have the red X. So things are going to start to populate. So I like to say it's like a very fancy Plinko board, if anybody knows what that is. It's starting to populate down the requirements, and you'll notice things are starting to be put in green, and basically tells the student, cool, that requirement's been met, and then they can keep moving forward. The idea is they should be able to self-service, but we know a lot of things are a little more tricky than they look like, but this is what helps them kind of see through that and where they can go next. This is a fun one. This actually happens quite often with our Maricopa students, I would say. So student will transfer in coursework, they'll get added to DARS, they'll take some ASU courses, they'll leave ASU, they'll go take courses somewhere else, they'll apply on back, and they'll readmit. So every time that happens, the DARS will unlock for that new set of coursework. And depending on what's happening, so let's say U of P, the student has some courses we hadn't evaluated yet, that'll come through our workflow. However, in all those changes, DARS is not going to unlock anything that's already been locked. And that's very important, because if the students already met with their advisor previously, maybe they had to make some adjustments that are specific to that program, we don't want to mess any of that up. So DARS is only going to unlock for new information that needs to be evaluated. Also, my team, in this example, we often have students go, hey, can you just rerun our record? No, we try not to unlock it. We want to work with the college first to make sure, because we're not advising specialists, like we don't know anything about the specific requirements, and we don't want to break anything. But it's kind of interesting to see how those students kind of go back and forth within DARS, and how DARS, for being as simple as it is, actually can recognize some really cool things. This is also what it looks like. So you'll start to see coursework come down that Plinko board and start to mark off some of those requirements for the student. And then the other thing is, a lot of students go, well, how do I know that that was a transfer course? We are very intentional in showing where that course came from. So students can go, oh, yeah, my Glendale Community College courses are being reflected here, and or my in-progress ASU courses. So there are quite a few transfer students who have completed degrees prior to coming to ASU. So when that happens, they get a special code put on the back end of their transfer eval page, where basically we're waiving all of ASU's university lower division general studies requirements by completing that degree. They look a little bit different on the student's end too, because you'll notice it just kind of gives like a blanket answer, like bachelor's completed, and then that's going to check off. What it does not fulfill is if that major requires a specific course. So let's say that major requires them to take MAT 117. It's not going to waive that for that requirement, but it will waive it for the general studies requirement. So that's a little tricky for students, because if maybe in that auto checking off those requirements, they didn't complete a MAT 117, they may be required to take one. So that's something that students often get a little confused about. So I don't know when. I know I've been with the department for almost 9 years, and all the time I've been there, we've always had this process. So it was a long time ago. But basically, we made the decision that any coursework that was taken prior to 1996 is going to automatically get an old flag applied to it. A lot of decisions were made in that reason. The biggest one being is that we have a lot of information to evaluate courses. We can get very creative in how we're finding the content of that course, but anything older than 1996 gets a little tricky because either institutions never posted it or it's in an archive or something of that nature. So to not hinder those students in their progress to their degree, we put this old flag, and then if students do need it to be evaluated for direct equivalency, they can work with our office and we'll work on that. Otherwise, that old flag automatically populates as elective credit. So if the student's like, hey, I don't actually need that course for this new major I'm in, then they may not go out of their way to go hunt through archives and provide some information to my team. However, they will show up in this little bottom section of their DARS that basically says, some of these courses are older. You're going to want to work with your academic unit to figure out how you go about getting those courses evaluated if needed. So this is a first-time full-time student that has transfer coursework. So even if that student is not considered a transfer student, our team will still see their coursework if it's transferred. Students who are first-time full-time students don't usually realize that because it's under 12 credit hours. So it's usually not a big part of their puzzle as they're coming to ASU, but we do see all of that. And so some things that will be a little bit different in their DARS audit. So transfer students don't have to take a lot of the ASU 101 courses. But in this example, if the student came in, had transfer coursework under 12 credit hours, meaning they're not considered transfer students, then they will be required to take some 101 courses. And that gets a little confusing for students because they'll go, I thought I didn't have to take that. No, you do, but you also have transfer coursework. So that will come through our workflow. And this is kind of how it looks on their DARS. International. This one's a fun one. So international, about, was it 2010? I'm looking at my expert over here. 2010 is when we decided to move away from giving block credit for international coursework. And now we actually process them very similar to domestic, where each individual course is going to be applied to their record as its own line. The tricky thing about international is there's a lot of ambiguity in some of what's being transferred in, whether or not we'll accept all of it. There's a lot of translation that goes in into it. And then I would say about 70% of international institutions don't play nice, meaning they don't have a prefix and number. So they'll just come in as a arbitrary prefix and number. It may or may not be that course every time it comes in, or it'll only come in by the title. And our systems have limitations with that in order to take that in. So a lot of these students will just bypass our team as a whole. So once we've vetted that institution, vetted those transcripts, they get what you see at the bottom, which is an ITL code. And then it might just be like a lower equivalency, meaning they get lower division elective credit until they provide us with more information. The way they provide us with more information is through the transfer guide. Transfer guide has its own limitations. We can't do anything smarter than you achieve at this point. So a lot of times, if they are any of those ones where we had to ask for more information, the only way to find what that equivalency could be is to search through our very large database in the transfer guide. So there's a lot of potential for international, but it does get a little more challenging. So you would have to work with our team a little bit closer. And I would also say for any of you guys who are with the units, really looking at what is needed versus what the student thinks they need, because that will be a lot of work for them in order to get some information to us. And that was my portion. Any questions? Yes. How'd I know? You're good. It's very helpful. We do have some work going on right now where they're looking into ways to make it easier. This isn't the only thing that students have to look at in order to understand their progress to their degree. There's sometimes some students in some majors have 3 things they have to look at: e-advisor, DARS, and then some very fancy workflow So yeah, I know the university is looking into ways to better share this information out. I don't know where it's at in that process, but very helpful. And I believe this is being recorded. So your comment was recorded. There you go. Uh-huh. Yeah. So they get vetted. So actually a portion of Jackie's office in admissions, they do review those. They try to look to see based on official documentation, what is comparable to a United States degree. So they'll break it. That's how we come up with the credit conversions. So typically a lot of international institutions don't have 1-to-1. So it'll be like 0.67, 0.82, something odd like that. And it's typically because you're right. A lot of other institutions abroad don't look at their coursework in that way. But that's what we use the experts in Jackie's office in admissions. They'll go through and they'll provide that information. If it's been vetted and you have access to App Extender, you can see what their credit conversion is. And then we use that to make equivalencies. A lot of times we have to get a little more creative with equivalencies to like kind of mark off some of those requirements, but that's something we work directly with the colleges with on a regular basis. Yeah. And those of you guys who didn't hear, Jackie did say that there are some guidelines they do use in order to make those decisions. It's not arbitrary in how they make those credit conversions. It is based off of the systems that are set up at least like for international and then in comparison to ours. So great questions. Anything else? Cool.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get into our demo next. So with the demo, anything that can go wrong can go wrong. So we made this very simple. And what we'd like to do is just run an audit because we've seen a lot of screenshots of the audits. Let's go ahead and just run an audit and see how that process is and how long it takes. Spoiler, it doesn't take very long. So we'll do this on our production system. And as mentioned, Sean and I, we do manage the system. So if it's not working, then it's because we're here at the data conference, but we expect it to work. So let's go ahead and we'll search our student we have set up here. And we're going to use a demo student for the sake of protecting our students' information. So we don't have a JoJo, we have the demo. And what we'll do is what we can do is maybe fantasize for a minute about degree program we maybe want to take. I mean, we have 400 plus degree programs. Does anyone want to throw one out there to run a what if audit? Nursing? Okay, I heard that one first. So let's go ahead and request a new what if audit for a nursing program. And we're using a demo student, so we don't have any transfer coursework. We don't have any current coursework. So we won't see a lot of the data, but the purpose of the demo is really to see the processing of an audit. Okay, so let's see here. Great, thank you. And we'll use the latest catalog year. Like I said, we're in production, so we're pretty up to date here. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. And now we see our audit is processing. In the background, there's a lot of things going on. We're doing a lot of insert statements on multiple tables as this audit's running. So here we have it. Didn't take very long, as I said. So obviously, we are going to see a lot of the red X's coming up. We don't have any coursework that's been, in progress or completed. So here we have it. I know, slightly anticlimactic, but there it is. It did process for us, and we can actually go here and just see that it did. Yep, there it is, and there I am running it. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to our workshop. We only had the one demo set up here. And did I do? Yeah. Oh, that was our demo. Okay.
Okay, so now we want to see what you can tell us about DARS. And so we have actually just some fun facts there. So roughly 2 million students and staff run audits a year. Instant access to progress toward degree 24/7. So we'll go to the activity. So the goal of this activity, well, let me preface. So as you've heard, it's a team effort using all the DARS applications and tools. So you've definitely heard a lot of verbiage, different phrases. So what we want to kind of challenge you with is everyone has sticky notes on their tables, and there should be pens. So we're going to ask you to write down, or you can even use some of these freebies, these examples, keywords or phrases that you believe are essential to DARS operations. You can get creative as well. And if you want to share with us what you've written down, we have prizes. I know what they are, but I haven't seen them yet. So I'm excited to see what they look like. But yeah, so we'll give you a couple minutes and then we'll continue. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, default audits, I'm just repeating for those on Zoom as well. Default audits are for their current program. What if is if they're planning on changing their major. It's kind of like exploring a bit. Yeah. Well, we're going to end a little early. So thank you so much to our guest speakers for you attending and staying with us for the past hour and a half to 2 hours. And if there's any other questions, we'll be around. Yeah, thank you so much. Enjoy your lunch. Enjoy the rest of the day. Yeah.